whatever your particular role is in education. My name is Eddie Partida, he, him, his. I'm the Director of Teacher Education here at Claremont Graduate University. So on behalf of CGU, the School of Educational Studies, and of course, this wonderful team we have here in Teacher Ed, I want to welcome you to the first of this three-part series titled, we're calling Circle Up. So before we get started, I want to give a couple of shout outs, some acknowledgements, and also do some housekeeping. First, a big shout out to our Dean, Dr. DeLacy Ganley, for supporting this work and helping us bring it to a wider audience, not just within CGU, but outside of our university to our education community. So big shout out to her. This series is also made possible through the support of a Teacher Quality Partnership Grant from the U.S. Department of Education. The workshop series is part of a larger effort here at CGU, in particular teacher education, to prepare, nurture, and sustain critical social justice educators. So you'll hear more about this throughout the workshops. This particular grant provides funding for folks to become teachers via an 18-month residency pathway with Alliance Schools. And we're really excited about this. I'll pop the link for more info about this particular program in the chat. If you have friends, if you have family members, if you have paraprofessionals that you would like to send our way, please do. We have this great opportunity for them to do our program with a lot of support, a lot of funding, and of course with our great faculty. So last bit of housekeeping before we move on is that we will be recording this session, but we're only going to post the presenter view. So don't worry about being in any kind of recording. We're going to share it on our Instagram channel. So if you haven't been following us or you want to follow us, please follow us at CGUTEP. Okay, so before we get into circle time, I'd like to invite you to join me in a moment of reflection, of gratitude, of appreciation in honor of the indigenous people whose ancestral lands we are currently living, working, and learning on. So for us here at CGU, that includes the Tongva and Serrano peoples. But for you, it might be different, right? So if you're not sure, we also invite you to consider how learning about the ancestral lands and history of the land that you are currently on might give you a deeper and more of an understanding of what it means to live and learn and work in your particular area. So at this time, I'd like to formally acknowledge that we are on traditional territory of the Tongva and Serrano peoples, and we extend our deepest gratitude to all past and present Tongva and Serrano peoples for their historic and present stewardship of this land. All right, now without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful facilitators, our guides in this wayfinding journey. First, we have Dr. Rebecca Hatkoff, who's clinical assistant professor here at CGU, also serves as a Claremont Fellows Project Coordinator, uniquely and intentionally situated at the intersection of K-12 schools and higher education. Her experiences have accrued into informed and nuanced views of the challenges and especially opportunities in K-16 education. So whether teaching, researching, or supporting our teachers in the field, Dr. Hatkoff remains invested in facilitating humanizing, supportive, and generative relationships between students, households, schools, and communities. Her research interests include culturally responsive K-16 practices and policies, critical social justice teaching competencies, classroom school ecology, effective and mutually empowering pedagogy, and strength-based views of schools, teachers, households, and communities. Also, we have Dr. Claudia Bermudez, or Doctora Claudia Bermudez, is an adjunct professor and coordinator for the department. Her research and teaching interests explore the significance of healthy classroom ecologies and the tension between critical social justice and subtractive schooling. Her work spans K-12 to higher education with an emphasis on anti-racist pedagogy, the intersection of class, race, social cultural capital in education, and socially just leadership. Between 2015 and 2017, both Dr. Bermudez and Dr. Hatkoff were part of a research team that were awarded a grant from the John Randolph Haynes and Dora Haynes Foundation to study highly effective teachers of historically marginalized students. And in 2019, The findings of this extensive study were published in a book that Dr. Bermudez co-edited with another CGU professor, Dr. Mary Poplin, titled Highly Effective Teachers of Vulnerable Students Practice Transcending Theory. Both featured chapters in this volume, both featuring chapters in this volume by Dr. Bermudez and Dr. Hatkoff. So it's my pleasure, it's my honor to call these two amazing teacher educator scholars, not just my colleagues, but my friends and my co-conspirators. So with that, I give you Dr. Claudia Bermudez and Dr. Rebecca Hatkoff.
Thank you so much for that joyful introduction, Eddie. As you can probably tell from the huge smiles on our faces, we're excited to be here and to be doing this work with you and to be sort of on a two levels, looking inward for ourselves, to look outward to our classroom ecologies and the broader ecosystems that we're a part of, but also this is one of our first efforts at CGU to take the work that we're doing inside of teacher ed and turn it outward to a broader community. So we really appreciate your engagement and also any feedback that you have on the work that we're doing and how we can always do better, which is part of our effort. In terms of the time that we're going to spend together, we wanted to orient you to the journey that we're going to take in these next couple of hours. Our hope is that we're going to look inward by grappling with positionality. We're going to do that by introducing you to a common definition and common ways of thinking about it, but also by mapping our positionality and participating in an exercise that can be pretty transformative when we're open to it. And we're also going to look outward by considering classroom ecology and our place within it. And how our positionality fits within classroom ecology. And for that, we'll also share a common definition with you. And we'll introduce some tools that we're very excited about that we're referring to as casually critical and disrupting curriculum that we can use to create a really empowering and anti-racist classroom ecology. And to just frame that work that we're going to do today, we wanted to proffer the idea that this work can be both a mirror and a window. It lets us see ourselves better and also see our place in the world and others better. And also, we wanted to share this idea from Dr. Crystal Laura, who's a scholar whose work we draw on and is a phenomenal thinker who has a way with words. And here she reminds us that challenging and unlearning what we assume we know about people, places, and things, and we add, including ourselves and our practice, is uncomfortable. Because finagling around those contradictions and tensions of implicit and explicit bias is easier than diving in and grappling with them. But that's exactly what we educators ought to be doing, is diving into the wreckage. And so we invite you today to dive into the wreckage with us and to make it joyful.
Excellent, thank you. So I am excited about beginning this work with you. So we have a bias alert for you as we dive into the wreckage. So we have this metaphor of lenses in teacher education, and Rebecca is always there with the props. I mean, we do rehearse, but her timing is impeccable. So we put these critical social justice lenses on because social justice is a term that can be empty or meaningful, and we're really striving for the latter. We're searching for meaning and for ways to connect these big, broad ideas, to filter them down in ways that are approachable and that we're able to enact in the classrooms. Ultimately, it comes down to what can we do in our classrooms to make education better and more humanizing. So we offer you the idea of common definitions today. Every time we talk about a big idea, we're going to ground it in a common definition, meaning common to our time together and our purpose together. And so the definition of critical social justice that we're operationalizing today comes from the work of Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo, and they posit that critical social justice means that we must recognize society is stratified along social group lines. So these inequalities are deeply and structurally embedded. They also call on us to recognize that we have to actively seek and make change that chips away at injustice and inequity in our roles as educators, and that part of the work is empowering students and their households and their communities, broadly speaking, to harness the resources they need to navigate an unjust world with empathy, savvy, and agency. And as much as possible, we're trying to show you the scholars and the thinkers and the elders that we're drawing upon to present the work that we do and that we love. So part of the work that we do and that we love is engaging in humanizing and joyful practices. And to us, that always means centering the people before the ideas. So we're going to introduce ourselves as your wayfinding partners in this time together. So my name is Claudia Bermudez, And one of the things that I'd like to share with you that is critical to my being as a scholar and as a person is my language. Spanish is my first language. This is an excerpt from one of my favorite poets, Pablo Neruda, and it is the language of my parents and my heart, and the language that I use to communicate with my children and my husband, and it informs everything I do, this love of my native language. Something else that informs everything I do is the idea that I'm the child of immigrants. My mother immigrated to this country from Guatemala. My father immigrated from Colombia. So their language that they passed on to me is part of the way I honor my ancestors and my elders and hold on to those connections that make me who I am. Another big part of who I am is the Los Angeles Unified School District. I spent 23 years there, starting as a paraprofessional and ending as a principal. I found a picture recently of me as a little baby teacher around circa, I'm going to call it 1996. And it really shaped my outlook on the world as being part of this huge entity that really informs the way education is perceived in this country, because it is the second largest school district in the country. CGU is another critical part of who I am and who I have become. I got my doctorate here in 2014, and those were my babies at the time. These are my babies now. The little one is a handful. She's a year and a half, and she just keeps us on our toes. But the idea of being the mother of multiracial children is something that is now very much a part of my identity as an educator. So I offer that window into who I am and why I'm here as a part of being in community with you.
And I'll pick up there by introducing myself as well. I did my undergraduate degree at Penn, where I studied English, and I started my teaching career as a high school English teacher when I was 22 and looked a lot like my students. And then I also did my PhD at Claremont, where I'm now teaching. And this is an excerpt from a chapter that I have published in the book that Claudia edited based on the research that we did. I grew up in Los Angeles, which is a very core part of my identity, and a lot of my family, I'm lucky, it lives here, and I'm also very close with them. And I just got my mom to send me this picture from my bat mitzvah because my Jewish identity also shapes the way that I look at the world. And then on top of that, I love camping. I have a dog who I just named Baldwin, just so I can send out pictures of him with pithy, critical quotes about America. I'm a Slurpee enthusiast. I'm passionate about Beyonce. And like Claudia, we share a love of poetry. And I offer these lines for the work that we do today as well, which is be like the fox who makes more tracks than necessary, some in the wrong direction. Practice Resurrection by Wendell Berry. And then I just want to take a meta moment to share, these are the things that I think of to share with you. And some of them are professional. And a lot of times in the context of workshops, just like Eddie introduced us, we share the professional because that's what we think we bring into this space or is more important. I also shared some cultural aspects of me because that shapes who I am. And then also my personal life has an additional influence on the way that I experience and interpret the world, but isn't always something that we value sharing in a professional context. I also want to highlight that I didn't share anything about my race, ethnicity, or immigrant history. I have all of those things. They don't matter as much to my positionality. They're not things that feel central to my identity, and they don't shape the way that I teach or practice. So these are just seeds we're going to start to plant as we work through these big ideas today. And one of the reasons that we share this information with you and share some of our stories is because this is one of our luminous elders, Bell Hooks, in her words, one of the ways that we become a learning community is by sharing and receiving one another's stories. And so sharing is one of those ways that helps us connect and also come to know each other better. And that's essential to the work that we're doing here. So we want to introduce you to one of our favorite tools, which is a microstory. And our common definition of microstory, again, in the context common to how we're talking about it right now, is just a short, concise story that's used to illustrate an abstract concept by grounding it in lived experience. And so to get us kind of playing with this idea, we're going to ask you to go into breakout rooms and tell one microstory of why you are here today. We're going to give you a little bit of time to think of your story. And when you enter your breakout rooms, we ask that you introduce yourselves. We know that some people who attend webinars on Zoom actually attend, and some don't. So if you end up in a breakout room with somebody who doesn't seem to be present, we're happy to shuffle you into a new room. And then share and also consciously receive the stories that you're hearing. Share only what empowers you. Whenever we choose to share a story, we can choose what we don't share as well. And try to keep it tight because we have a schedule and we have a lot we want to get through. So we're going to strive to keep you in the same rooms if possible, not always possible on Zoom. And we invite you into this practice. And as you share, to also consider, how does it feel? So we'll give you just a few seconds to get your micro story together, and then we will release you into breakout rooms. All right. Welcome back. I think we're waiting for a couple more folks to pop back in from their breakout rooms. A little slow. Hopefully you had a nice opportunity to just start sharing and receiving stories. So in the work that we're doing, we want to sort of assert a common goal, which is really just to help kids and students be as successful as possible. According to our definitions of success, yes, but also more importantly, according to theirs. And so as we go through today's workshop, we want you to keep in mind the stories that you tell yourself about what is and is not appropriate to address in school, including about your own identity and your experiences. What are the stories you tell yourself? And are those stories serving you and serving your students? Also, pay attention to if anything makes you feel defensive, and use that sense of defensiveness. If you do feel defensive, use that as a cue or a sign that that might be a spot where you need to do a little bit more work. And lastly, this is a metaphor you'll hear us mention a lot, but we just want to plant the seed. How can you use this workshop to begin more low-stakes discussions about race and power? Yes, some of these conversations are very high stakes, and the stakes broadly are very high, but when we treat every discussion about race and power and every opportunity to introduce social justice as something that's potentially fraught, we don't get to lean into the joy of bringing these experiences and these opportunities to our students.
And speaking of joy, one of the things that makes us most joyful is grappling with this idea of positionality, which is why it is in the name of our unworkshop and in our objectives. So let's ground ourselves in a common definition of positionality. So we are using the definition that comes from Dr. Mary Kay Thompson-Tetrio, formerly of Cal State Fullerton, who defines positionality as the social and political context that creates your identity in terms of race, class, gender, sexuality, ability, status, etc. There's more to that, which are all markers of relational positions to power rather than essential qualities. So it is this relational aspect that we're going to explore in our session today. And some of you have done this work with us, so consider it a refresher, a good way to circle back to the seeds that we've planted to see how well they've taken, to see if you've tended them, or to see if you need a little replanting and coming back to center to see how these ideas can resonate in your classroom in the work that you do. So if this is positionality, right, all of these aspects of who we are, then we're going to take that idea and use it in a framework that comes to us from the amazing Dr. Bell Hooks, who posited in her seminal work, center to margin theory. So center to margin theory talks about, from the preface of this work, she says, to be in the margin is to be part of the whole, but outside the main body. And then she further states that this mode of seeing, this idea of considering what defines the center and what defines the margin as outside of the center, it's a way of seeing that reminds us of the existence of a whole universe, a main body made up of both margin and center. So we're going to model for you, and we're going to ask you to consider what aspects of your personality reside closer to the center and closer to the margin. So before we go on, we need to have a common understanding and agreement of what defines the center. So when we say the center, we are talking about what defines the locus of power. Globally, it would be different, so we're talking about nationally. In this country, at this moment in time, what is considered normal, neutral, aspirational? So I'll ask you to put it in the chat, or please feel free to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear actual voices of people. So just call out something that would define an aspect of the center, a descriptor of the center.
If somebody's neurotypical.
Excellent, thank you.
Someone who is white.
Thanks, Grace.
Someone who is able-bodied.
Excellent. Absolutely.
It's typically men.
Correct. I see some ideas in the chat, I think.
I'm seeing some mainstream white supremacy, straight cis male.
Excellent. All right, so you are definitely on the right path. So let's kind of capture some of these ideas and put them there. So broadly speaking, these are the things, the descriptors that are considered aspirational in this country, that define the locus of power. If the more of these descriptors that include you, the more power you tend to have in this society. The further away that you are from these descriptors in the middle, the closer you are to the margin. That being said, here are some ways to consider the elements that name the things in the center. So these words that you're seeing in blue, broadly think of them as categories, right? So if you categorize your nationality, your race, your ethnicity, your age, your education level, sexual orientation, these are ways to help you conceive of how close you are either to the center or to the margin. So Rebecca and I have mapped our positionalities. Mine are in white and Rebecca's are in blue. And we want to walk you just through a few selected aspects of our identities to highlight the way in which center and margin theory works. So for example, I define myself, my race and my ethnicity as two separate things. And I'm very aware of that, especially in doing this work. The term Latina doesn't encompass my racial identity. So I identify as a multiracial person whose ethnic heritage I identify with the word Latina. I don't use the word Hispanic. In referring to other people to be inclusive, I use Latinx, but to refer to myself, I enjoy and I am very connected to the term Latina because it encompasses my gender identity.
And I identify as white. And when I think of my whiteness, I think of it as my ethnicity and my race, even though my ethnicity is technically from Eastern European countries. But because of my religion, most of my family members who are from Eastern European countries fled and were persecuted. So I have zero connection. I don't identify. I've never researched. And I have also no curiosity about my genetic makeup, because for so much of my life and so often in most days, I can take for granted my whiteness because it's so close to the center.
Okay. So another aspect that I'd like to highlight is this idea of educational level. So as you saw from the ideas that I shared with you, I have a PhD from Claremont Graduate University. I don't put this concept in the middle because only 3% of advanced degrees in this country go to Latinas. So this caused a lot of my journey to getting my PhD was really fraught with a lot of imposter syndrome, a lot of questioning whether I could contribute to the field, a lot of questioning if I had the social and cultural capital to get to the place where I wanted to be. So it, to me, because we get to define our own positionality, and I'm just sharing with you kind of a window into the way I would define mine, it is outside of the realm of what is considered the center.
And I also have a PhD, and we wanted to highlight that sometimes the same category of positionality is mapped in a different place because our identities are intersectional. So for me, I'm a second generation PhD. My mom has a PhD, and she was one of few women to earn her PhD in sociology from USC. So she went through an experience of being one of few, but because she had that experience in my household, I took for granted that I could get a PhD if I wanted to, and that I would if I wanted to. So I don't have imposter syndrome because I was raised, because of my mom and also because of my white privilege and other racial identity, to believe that I could do it and it wouldn't be a big deal. And so that's how I received it. It ended up being a bigger deal, but I map it firmly in the center because it's not complicated in the same ways for me.
Okay. And then I'd like to highlight this idea, if I can get my, there you go. Okay, I'm highlighting an identity in the center. So all of these identities, that list that you see in white, heterosexual, cisgender, US citizen, able-bodied, neurotypical, those are aspects of my identity that reside in the center. And I'm sharing with you that in doing this work, this is the part that made me supremely uncomfortable. I'm so connected to and so committed to exploring my identities that reside in the margin or in that liminal space between margin and center, that I literally had never stopped to consider the fact that I carry privilege from these aspects of my positionality. And it is something that I have had to grapple with and I've had to really assess, because as an educator, if I am not really interrogating my cisgender status, then how can I show up for people that I want to be in community with, my students, for example, that are gender non-binary or queer?
And I wanted to highlight my Jewish identity to juxtapose exactly what Claudia just said. So much of my identity is in the center. And in doing this work and over the time of doing the work, I've had to grapple with the amount of privilege and power that I have access to in ways that made me uncomfortable to acknowledge my identities that are in the margin. And so I actually further marginalized my marginalized identities. And even in previous iterations of mapping my positionality, wouldn't put my Jewish identity so far to the margin because I felt it was uncomfortable for me to call in any of my marginalized identities when so many of my identities are in the center.
So why are we doing this work? Why are we talking positionality as teachers? So many of us have been brought up in a system or trained in a system where all of these things that we're discussing, these aspects of self, are things that we are taught to check at the door. And so we are in direct opposition to that. We want to dismantle that concept and push back against it, because we recognize that the research base, and here we have three researchers whose work we really admire and highlight, their research indicates that student learning opportunities may be hindered when teachers fail to consider their own and their students' racial and cultural backgrounds, and instead adopt color and culture-blind beliefs, ideologies, and practices. So we are saying the work of doing positionality and further bringing positionality into your space and creating a classroom ecology, an idea that we'll get to in a minute, is predicated on knowing your positionality and uplifting that and amplifying that and using it as part of your teaching pedagogy. So here is where we are going to hand off to you. Rebecca is going to put a link in the chat that links you to a slide that looks just like this. So this is an easy way to kind of click and drag your positionalities either closer to the center or farther away from the center in the way that you saw our positionalities mapped out. So we're going to give you time to map your positionality, actually just 2 minutes. So it will be quick. You may not get to all of it. Then you're going back to the groups that you were in initially. So I'm glad to see that some people were saying hello to each other virtually in the chat, because you'll be back with those colleagues to discuss 2 elements of your positionality. Share only things that empower you. We don't want you at any point to feel that you are being re-traumatized or asked to share things that are not comfortable for you. So share things that empower you, or share your thoughts about the process of mapping or the example that Rebecca and I gave you. And then when we come back as a whole group, we will debrief together. Are there any questions about the process, about what you're going to do? Good. Okay, so we're going to take a 2-minute interlude. We're big believers in musical interludes. So this musical interlude will be just for independent, silent mapping of your positionality. Then I'll push you into your groups. All right, putting you in your groups again to share 2 elements of your positionality or your experience with the mapping exercise for 6 minutes. All right, welcome back. Okay, we're always dying to know at this moment, because we're virtual, we can't walk around and just subtly eavesdrop on your conversation. So we would love if anybody would care to share their thinking about what we just did, this whole mapping your positionality concept. We'd love to hear it.
I could share. Oh, someone else raised their hand.
Go ahead, Audrey, and then we'll go to Allison next.
Perfect.
Yeah, so for mine, it was interesting because I think a lot of the times I try to center myself as like, I'm a multicultural or multiracial, like woman who is teaching science, it's like all these little, like on the margins. But when you really think about like being neurotypical and being able-bodied, like Eddie kind of shared, it's like easy to have these blind spots. So it's like, how do we make sure that we put on the right glasses to see through those blind spots in our day-to-day?
Thank you, Audrey, for sure. Allison?
I was just going to say that I mean, this would be a great exercise to do at the schools, you know, just as adults to do first, and then we can do this with the kids. At our school this year, I know we did a similar thing at the beginning of the school year, but I do like the almost tactile part of it, right? Like you can move things and like, so I really like that aspect of it.
In
Awesome.
person, we do it with Post-its, so it's even more tactile.
Great. Anything else? Okay.
What I appreciate about this activity is that it really forced me to look at aspects of my identity that is indeed privilege. I often don't see myself as privileged because so many of my identities are in the margins. And so, this is real, and it gives a different perspective of, for me anyway, it gives me a perspective of responsibility to understand that, wait a minute, these, you know, identifiers that are of privilege, how do I use that? How do I leverage that for equity for children? So thank you for this activity.
Tina, thank you for those words. That is exactly where we want this to go. How do you leverage this to make it meaningful and productive and useful and joyful as part of your practice? Absolutely. So we'd like to highlight the idea that when we engage in this work, sometimes there often is an aspect of shame or guilt. So if that is where you are feeling, or you're feeling bad that, oh, I hadn't stopped to consider some of these elements of or aspects of my identity that are in the margin, absolutely sit with those feelings and honor them and be there for a minute. But if you stay there, it could be something that turns into a self-defeating space. So we need this awareness. We need awareness to be effective change agents. We need to know that the more we can recognize where our positionalities are mapped, the better we could be at reaching out to others and supporting them in wherever their positionalities are. So if we have aspects of our positionality that are tied to the center, it's our responsibility to move out, right? So when we are in the center, it is our ethical obligation, we believe, to move to the center and partner, because the goal that we want is to turn allyship into a verb, to ally, not just to be allies passively, but to say, in what ways can I enact allyship and do things and move in ways that affirm and support others.
And, you know, another reason that we talk about positionality is because all of our positionality, and not just some parts of it, shape the way we look at the world. And so we've mapped identity elements, but also our experiences shape the way we look at the world. So I'm giving you this image, and I want to ask you, what do you see? And if you've seen this image before, you might know what it is. And if you haven't seen this image before, you're probably drawing on past experiences and things that are familiar with you to interpret what it is. Any guesses? You can pop them in the chat if you'd like to. Or say it out loud. The moon, yep. Often people think this looks like planets, and that I think is by design, but actually what these are the bottoms of pots and pans. And when you know that, you see it in that way. But we have to be really deliberate about what lenses are we picking up when we're deciding how we're going to see the world. And so we're saying we always have to pick up our critical social justice lenses, because the reality is that our positionality and our experiences, the intersection of those, shape and influence the way we see, consider, interpret, value, ignore, and respond to everything. But in our classroom ecologies, that includes students and households and language and content and voices, norms, goals, purpose, and so much more. And then on top of that, our schools are situated within a broader context. And I'm going to make some big claims that I feel comfortable making in this context because you all chose to be here. But sometimes I ease us into this a little bit more. But we are in a world and a context that's dominated by white supremacy. And when I say white supremacy, I'm not talking about white supremacists. We're not talking about the KKK or people who identify as Nazis. I'm talking about the supremacy of white values. And the way that that plays out is that the white point of view are normalized across government, institutions, and media. We also have white norms used as the reference points against which everyone else is judged. And that's also particularly true in schools, because white teachers comprise roughly 85% of the teaching force, and 80% of those are women. So we have a very strong influence. People who look like me and have many aspects of my positionality have an undue influence over the norms of schooling. And then on top of that, silence, which is often called white silence, but is not only white silence, about race is considered neutral, as if not naming the different experiences, ignoring them, and erasing them is somehow neutral. And so we want to offer, in opposition to that idea, that schools are not neutral, classrooms are not neutral, teachers are not neutral, I'm not neutral, and you are not neutral. And when we recognize that, then we have an opportunity to really prepare to consider what is our role within our classroom ecosystems. How do we fit within this ecology? And unless we know that our role is not neutral, we don't know how to answer that question. And so we want to give you the opportunity to grapple, like we said, grapple with positionality, grapple with these tough ideas, to brainstorm and consider how can you acknowledge elements of your positionality and its influence over your perspective with your students? How can you name that with your students? How can you give your students the same chance? Which parts of your positionality do you tend to leave out of the classroom, and why? What parts of your identity could you share deliberately in ways that might actually empower your students? And I'm popping into the chat a document that we've designed to use to help you take notes and just kind of keep track of your ideas, because we also want you and challenge you to make a commitment. What's one commitment you can make for March? And if you are in a place where you're feeling a little defensive about the idea that your classroom is not neutral, sit in that for a little bit and see how it feels. So we're going to give you just another 2 minutes. We know it's not enough. There's never enough time, but that's why we're giving you an artifact that you can continue to use for reflection even after our time together. So it'll prompt you to make a copy. I'm going to pop another 2-minute song, and we'll just give you a couple minutes to reflect and start generating ideas, and as you also let them marinate. Okay. So hopefully you started to get out some ideas, and you have some more that you want to keep letting marinate as we continue to work and as time goes by. So now what we're going to do is take that step, that next step, in thinking about, now we have a clearer sense of our positionality and many of the aspects that inform the way that we interact and relate within our classroom, and we want to find that place. So before we go here, I'm just going to ask you to do something a little weird. It's going to feel like a non sequitur, but I just want to get you to think for a second, what do you know about wolves? What do you know about wolves? I'm pretty into wolves right now. It's a new passion for me, but it's growing deeper and deeper by the day. It turns out, and as you're thinking, what do you know about wolves, right? It turns out that the gray wolf, which is the species that we have in the United States, was on the endangered list for 45 years. And it was just taken off the endangered species list this past October. And now there are 6,000 gray wolves in California. And some people feel that it is, Brisa already kind of knows where I'm going here. I appreciate it. Some people feel gray wolves should not have been taken off the endangered species list because 6,000 is a lot, but not enough. But it's controversial there. And I'm just going to plant a seed for you to think about as we go through this next section on classroom ecology, which is, what do you have in common with wolves? And this may be a question you've thought about before, maybe it's not, but now it's time. So keep it in your head. What do you have in common with wolves? And now we're going to talk about one of our favorite things, which is classroom ecology.
Awesome. So in thinking about classroom ecology, we want to present this idea of attention force. So this is a metaphor and an image that we use a lot in our teacher education program, this idea of two forces pulling against each other. And so the two things that we want to highlight for you right now is the prevalence of militarized language in education in tension with ecological language that we can use, that we can enact in education. So when we talk about the militarized language of education, when we talk about words like comply or control, behave, enforce, monitor, those are kind of at the low end of the spectrum of militarized language. This insistence on administrators, and I was a principal for 4 years, and I was one of those administrators that insisted on this, for teachers to show and have in a very prominent place the rules, consequences, and rewards, right? The system of rewards and punishments that is so endemic to K-12 education. Order, obedience, detention, ramping up into actual police presence, high-tech ID card dog tags, real-time surveillance cameras, even chain link fences. This is all encompassed in the idea really of classroom management. So as you could tell by the title of this unworkshop and by the ideas that we're presenting, we're not down with classroom management. We want to present to you and invite you to consider the power and the impact. And Rebecca is there with the props. If you can see her image, please look for it, because she is guiding us into this ecological language with a prop that talks to the importance of nurturing and cultivating, growing, planting seeds, sowing ideas, caring and tending for each other as professionals. So this is a way that we are caring and tending for each other by creating spaces where we exchange these kinds of ideas, by creating environments intentionally, by being in relationship, by thinking about ecosystems and analyzing them, evolving, maturing, engaging in practices like circle and restorative justice, and thinking about how we sustain each other and how we sustain the ecologies that we want to create. And so much of this, I want to recognize, comes from the work of Indigenous pedagogy and from the elders that have known that this is a way of being that is humanizing and empowering for all. So when we talk about classroom ecology, this is the kind of language that we want to use and that we want to teach our children. So this is the tension force between classroom management and classroom ecology. So classroom ecology is the seed that we're planting, and our common definition this time is in the form of an image. So in teacher ed, we define classroom ecology as the interplay and the interaction and the connectedness among the teacher, students, content can't be left aside, right? Rigorous teaching is foundational to critical social justice. It is not all about feeling good, right? Sometimes relationships don't feel good. Even when they're good relationships, they don't feel good. It's not that kind of relational thinking. It's about pushing in ways that are positive and healthy, creating a beautiful and sustaining physical environment, and tending to and cultivating the socio-emotional experience. All of these things together are what we mean when we talk about classroom ecology, and we're inviting you to consider how you can incorporate this idea into your own practice. Another tension force that we want to point out that manifests itself in the idea of management versus ecology. On the management side, we've had this concept traditionally of zero tolerance, right? A child does anything and they get written up, or they get suspended or expelled for insubordination, defiance, any kind of fighting. On the other side of that, we have the idea of zero indifference. So we want to highlight that classroom ecology does not mean there are no parameters and no boundaries. We want to say that there are parameters and boundaries, but they are humanizing and uplifting and do not require automatic suspensions or expulsions or any punishments that take kids out of class. It's about being in community. And sometimes that means calling in members of our community or our classroom community and saying this thing, this word, this action, this choice wasn't productive or healthy for our classroom ecology. How do we repair? How do we move on from that? That's what we mean by zero indifference. So that is one of the foundational pieces of classroom ecology. So when we consider this idea of classroom ecology, we ask questions like, how can I manage my students' behavior more effectively? So the invitation that we are proffering to you is to start thinking more in terms of how can I adjust the conditions in my classroom ecology to better support this student. And so we have this beautiful model for you of how natural ecosystems interact with one another. How can we start diagramming or thinking in whatever way makes sense to you as you sense make these ideas, being in relationship with every part of our classroom ecology. So one of the elders whose work that we rely on heavily along with bell hooks is Lisa Delpit. And Lisa Delpit talks about the concept that came from Kleinfeld, was the person who originated this term, but Lisa Delpit picks it up and runs with it and says that warm demanders expect a great deal of their students, convince them of their own brilliance, and help them to reach their potential in disciplined and structured environments. That is what we are proposing to you, that in order to be that piece in our classroom ecology model, that teacher piece, what kind of teacher do we invite you to be? Do we want all our teacher education students to be? Is the teacher that is the warm demander, the teacher that expects a lot but also gives a lot. And as part of that process, we also draw on the work of Zaretta Hammond. So Zaretta Hammond has this incredible text that we use in class, Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, and she draws from the work of Chris Gutierrez. So I love the way all of these ecological models are coming together, right? All of these thinkers are working in community with each other. And what Chris Gutierrez talks about is the classroom as a sociocultural third space. So we're thinking of it as an ecological space, a place for students to explore their individual and collective identities through different types of discourse, through uses of language and emotional support. This is what we mean by what our classrooms, including our virtual classrooms, can and should look like. So the phrase that Rebecca and I use often in this work that we do and that our colleagues have been using as well is the idea that as part of this process of becoming warm demanders, creating healthy classroom ecologies, shifting our focus away from the language of management and control to the language of growth and sustaining each other, we talk about being on a journey and wayfinding that comes to us from Polynesian traditions, this concept of wayfinding to our destination. And the destination that we are on the road toward is becoming anti-racist educators. So this comes from the work of Dr. Ibram Kendi, who says to us pretty clearly that the problem with using a phrase such as not racist is that it is a claim that signifies neutrality. If nothing else, by this point in our time together, you should know that we're not down with neutrality. It is not something that we value or sustain or want to sustain in the classroom. Saying I am not a racist, but neither am I aggressively anti-racism is kind of this in-between language that seeks to sustain this myth of neutrality. One either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. So this is a big proposition. It's a heavy lift, but we feel that it is morally and ethically necessary in the work that we choose to do and that we do with love and with joy. So we frame our thinking in terms of the journey that we're all on and that we want to be on with you. Dr. Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo kind of wrap up this thought for us. This is their seminal book that we use in our teacher education program, The Best Introduction to Critical Social Justice that I've found in all the reading that we do. And I love the way they tell us that society is structured in ways that make us all complicit. So that means everybody in this room, Rebecca, myself, each one of us is complicit in systems of inequality. There is no neutral ground. And once we realize if this is the case, then how can I leverage everything at my disposal to create the kind of world that I want our children to be in? We're going to give you some questions to help you start thinking along those lines. So again, adapted from the work of Özlem Sensoy and Robin DiAngelo, they give us some guidelines to strive for or to work toward. So the first three are to strive for intellectual humility, recognize the difference between opinions and informed knowledge, and letting go of the personal anecdotal evidence as proof of X, Y, or Z, and looking at broader societal patterns, but also trusting experience as text. When we tell stories, when we engage in relationship with one another, that should inform our practice as well. So we've attached some questions that we're going to give you time to think about in a moment. So when we strive for intellectual humility, the questions, these are not the only questions, but these are a few questions to get the juices flowing, is do you see your students as experts? When we're talking about acknowledging or recognizing the difference between opinions and informed knowledge, where do you seek credible expertise? Who are your go-to people? We've been trying to model for you the people that we consider credible experts are the people whose work is grounded in this concept of critical social justice. And looking at broader societal patterns asks us to recognize how we are recognizing others' personal anecdotal evidence, or if we're just recognizing our own and we're in the echo chamber of our own experiences. You're going to have these questions are in your note-taking guide, in your artifact. So the last two questions that Sensoy and DiAngelo posit are, notice your own defensive reactions and use those as an entry point and recognize how your own positionality informs your perspective and reactions. So we're asking you to consider what makes you defensive. in doing this work, I can tell you that I have gotten defensive. I have said, well, no, I don't do that, or I have never said that about this particular group. So it took me a beat to really ease into the work and think, all right, that's not productive in where I want to be. That's not helping me on this part of my journey. And which elements of your positionality might you be tempted to check at the door? Because again, that's the way we've been trained. Most teacher education programs have trained us to, by omission, to not think about these things and not consider them worthy of bringing into our classroom space. So we'd like you to ask the hard questions and do the hard work right now. Using your artifact, your sense-making guide, ask yourself one of those hard questions that we've shared. And then back in your groups, share in ways that empower you with your group. So pick a question that you feel that you would like to explore and share with your group, and we'll put you in. It'll be a quick one this time, just to explore that concept and start getting comfortable with asking and considering those hard questions. So we will do 3 minutes for that.
I'm going to open up the rooms now, so if you need a little bit of time to think as you get into them, that's okay. You can take that little think time and then connect when you're in there.
Hi there.
Oops, sorry, Rachel.
I joined a little late. No, I'm so sorry for coming in late. I hope I didn't, derail anything.
No, not at all. Would you like to join a group? I'm happy to pop you in with somebody who would be
Sure.
great. Okay,
That would be great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Welcome back. I see some smiles and some laughter. That's always a good sign. We know it was too short. You probably got cut off. That's the constant challenge and the extremely awkward thing about Zoom breakout rooms is that you don't even get to like finish it quietly with the person sitting next to you. So definitely feel free to private message anyone with contact information if you want to connect with the folks that you've been meeting in your breakout room. So up until this point, we've been discussing and kind of introducing really big ideas, wrestling and grappling with our own positionality, and then thinking about a new way of looking at what we do in the classrooms and viewing it from an ecological framework instead of thinking about it from the management perspective. And now what we want to do is we want to take this into some concrete actions. We want to make connections between the concept of understanding our positionality, understanding that we're operating within an ecosystem and our classroom is an ecosystem, and then thinking about, okay, so how do we start to disrupt the norms of white supremacy? How do we start to enact anti-racism? How do we start to make sure that what we're doing in our classroom is humanizing and affirming and validating and includes all of our students and all of their identities so that they can be whole, dynamic people in our room? And that's a big, hard question, and it's something that often people get intimidated by. And so what we want to offer to you as we start discussing a lot of examples, that's what we're about to give you. So feel free to take notes, but we'll also send out a PDF of our slides afterwards so you can access those examples. But the only thing that we can do is start where you are, right? So wherever you are, start there, but don't stay there. So all of the different examples that we're about to offer you as a gift and sort of a tool can be scaled. You can enter them at a low level, you can take them to a high level. So keep that in mind as we go through these examples and see what's sticky for you. And the purpose of thinking about this, right, is we want to know, how do I nurture a healthy anti-racist classroom ecology? How do I make my classroom a critical container that's empowering for all students, but especially for my marginalized students? And how do I make sure that the values of that ecosystem are trust, partnership, and again, of course, an academic mindset? We haven't been talking about rigorous instruction, but we want to continue to shout out that rigorous instruction is one of the core pillars of any critical social justice practice. We have to be great teachers and know our content excellently in order to give our students access to it. So again, another reason that we do this is because of our positionality, because of the norms of school. There are so many of our students who go through their entire schooling experience and are never affirmed and never see evidence that they matter, or people like them matter, or people who have had their experiences matter. And Adrienne Rich has a really powerful quote, a poet, an essayist, and just a brilliant feminist thinker, And she talks about how when those who have the power to name and socially construct reality choose, and it is a choice, not to see you or hear you, whether you're dark-skinned, old, disabled, female, speak with a different accent or dialect than theirs, when someone with the authority of a teacher, say, describes the world and you are not in it, there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium, as if you looked into a mirror and saw nothing. And so the tools that we're offering are really to combat this reality and to say that at the very least, let's describe a world that includes all of our students. And another way to think about this is through one of my favorite passions, which is teen dramas. So growing up, I watched a lot of teen dramas. I loved Beverly Hills 90210. I'm from the Valley, so of course I loved 90. And I loved Dawson's Creek as well, which came out when I was in high school. These were great TV shows, but these shows did not describe a world that included all of our students and their households. These were shows that used BIPOC or queer folks to serve as plot devices and to create drama. And now I'm excited to say there are some amazing teen sort of millennial targeted dramas that I watch that are casually critical, that do describe a world that includes whole dynamic people who are allowed to have whole dynamic identities. So all aspects of characters in these shows, positionality is a part of their everyday life. And it's not like today I am dating a Black person, what's gonna happen? And tomorrow my best friend down the street came out, what's gonna happen? No, it's like we can be Black, we can be queer, we can be Latinx all at the same time, walking through the world. And that's what we're hoping to describe in our classrooms as well. So to that end, we're gonna give you 2 tools. And we think of them as tools, but we also think of them as gifts. So the first one is this concept of just being casually critical. Casual, just like this small pony walking backwards. It's about incorporating your evolving critical social justice perspective, so picking up those critical social justice lenses and casually problematizing and bringing in ways that describe a more inclusive world that's not necessarily related to content. It can be, but it's not necessarily related. Let me show you what I mean. One of the things we can do is shift our examples to include and excite our students. So maybe I have word problems and I'm using these benign word problems. One class has this many students, one has that. Why not give students facts that also get at the same skills, but actually give them a vision of the ways in which they're included and celebrated and growing in power in the world? By sharing that the numbers of Latinx students who are enrolled in college have almost doubled, or have more than doubled, since 1996. When we're thinking about the cost of something or finances, why not also introduce the idea that our students have power and agency to affect change by telling them or planting the seed that if they're saving money, they can raise that money or they can donate that money to causes that are in the world that relate to issues that they may or may not know about, but that they may also be experiencing. Those can be local or they can be global or national. We can also shift the literature that we're using and create or pick texts that are going to be more inclusive. In general, we don't need to use Dr. Seuss anymore. I feel deep nostalgia for Dr. Seuss, but there's a lot of evidence, irrefutable evidence, that Dr. Seuss perpetuated racist ideas. He drew racist characters, drew racist caricatures also of different races and ethnicities. They're still evident in the text. It doesn't matter if we feel nostalgic about it. We don't need to use Dr. Seuss in our classes. We don't need to use stories like Caps for Sale that Claudia is obsessed with. I don't really know, but it's a story that apparently all the kids have to read, but has no cultural relevance and is very hard to access. So why not tell use text with our students that actually empower them again, show them that they have power and agency in the world to affect change, to affect policy, to affect their communities in meaningful ways. Another way that I like to be casually critical is to just be critical of media, images, and perspectives. Sometimes that means deliberately selecting bad images, but also deliberately selecting images that are going to affirm our students. So maybe I pick that first image of a white family, but when I put it up on the board, I use the opportunity to say to my class, this wasn't a great image. I'm sorry I picked this. Most families in California aren't white, and not all families are heteronormative. So I'm not sure why I picked this image that's just passing on these hegemonic ideas or these dominant ideas, right? I want to highlight that women can be in STEM. So I can say I like that these scientists are women, and I was looking for a picture of women who are scientists, but not all scientists are white. It was just hard to find a group of diverse scientists together, which shows us we need more diverse scientists. I can also show a picture of a Black young man doing math. and announce to my class that I intentionally searched for it. And maybe I can also tell them that it was hard to find it, because a lot of people don't have the idea that Black men can do math. But in our class, we know different. We know that Black men can do math. And so maybe we take pictures of all of our students doing math and we put them on YouTube so that if somebody else is looking, not YouTube, but Google, with permission, if somebody else is looking, they can find them there. But just thinking about how can we casually introduce this idea that the world doesn't always describe and include all of us. And in our classroom, we can be different. When we're looking at textbooks, how many of you know who wrote your textbooks? But textbooks are a foundational source of authority, and they're not all the same. And who wrote them? And what perspectives are included or excluded? So let's call out the potential bias in those textbooks and debunk the myth that they're neutral. We can tell our students that we have to keep an eye out for the limitations of the point of view in this textbook, especially since none of the authors are BIPOC. We can say that clearly and casually. We also like to talk a lot about naming the thing. So we can name the thing ourselves, or we can give our students a chance to name it. So let's say I say something that was inappropriate. I can say, ooh, I didn't think of that. Thanks for calling me in, if somebody mentions it. Or I can also say, ooh, that came out wrong. Let's unpack the assumptions and biases together in what I just said, in ways that model for my students that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to unpack them, and that when we do that, we do better. And when you know better, you do better. Same thing in terms of school. We want to help our students navigate policies that might not be empowering to them and let them know that those policies are arbitrary, but we don't always have the power to just dismiss them. So let's tell our students, I don't agree with that policy. I think its definition of appropriate is really narrow, but let's figure out how we can navigate it so that they can develop that kind of navigational capital, figure out how to make it work. So these are just some kind of ways to be casually critical in the classroom, the kind of things that we can do every day, not only in the classroom, but also in our lives. And Claudia is going to pick up there and share both slightly less casual ways of disrupting the curriculum and also the intersection of both of these concepts.
Great. So I'll pick up the thread there and know that you'll have time to go back into your groups and start playing with these ideas and start brainstorming ways that you can do this in your classroom. So along with our friend the pony, just casually walking backwards, our two images down at the bottom are tools and a gift, because we feel that these are tools that we use in our classroom, but we're also giving you a gift, as educators do to one another, and the freedom to borrow these ideas and to make them your own and use them in ways that empower your students. So our common definition for disrupting curriculum is the concept of problematizing curriculum, decentering white perspectives, and amplifying and celebrating the experiences, knowledge, and contributions of marginalized populations, especially BIPOC. What does that look like? Or what can that look like? So it can look like taking texts. Often we think of canonical texts as written by white folks, but sometimes there are sprinkled throughout the canon, there are texts written by people of color that become the thing, the only book that is read. So I've worked with, in my dissertation research, I worked with students that read The House on Mango Street in 6th grade, in 8th grade, in 10th grade. They just kept coming back to this moment of Sandra Cisneros. So disrupting the curriculum is expanding our focus and thinking, how can we use works like So Hard to Say by Alex Sanchez that talks about the themes of teenage angst and coming into your own and kind of romantic and sexual exploration between two boys? Can we use the work of Sonia Manzano, The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, that talks about these big seminal themes that's the purpose of reading literature, to kind of find these big universal themes and explore them. So the themes of liberating yourself from your family and becoming your own person. The theme of The Lightning Dreamer is this beautiful, beautiful text of kind of hanging on to your identity, forging your own identity, but hanging on to your collective identity, this play between individual and collective identity and what matters and what you hold on to. These are all huge ideas that are called out by the California ELA-ELD framework as intellectual quality. So as educators, we're called upon to provide students with intellectually motivating, challenging, and purposeful tasks, along with the support to meet these tasks. So why can't we use texts that reflect and celebrate a wider range, a more representative range of who we are? And sometimes we've got our math and science friends, our STEM friends, that say, I mean, you've got it easy in the humanities. You pick up a book and you do the thing and you talk about these ideas. I'm teaching some biology over here. I'm teaching some chemistry. I'm not seeing how we can make any of this happen in STEM therefore it's not my work. To that we say, it's absolutely your work, and let's show you exactly what that could look like in 55 minutes. So just as an example, we could break down a 55-minute math or science class in this way. As we're modeling here for you, we play music, preferably music where the students have some say in what that is as they walk in. It's setting the tone in a super easy, low-hanging fruit kind of way, easy to do. And then we split up our time like this. We invite people into community, yes, in the science classroom, in the physics classroom, in the algebra classroom. 5 minutes of circle or good news or high grade compliments, which are all strategies of connection and relationship, can be done in 5 minutes. Then we're going to highlight and amplify a little bit this 5 minutes of STEM folks of color. So often the idea that our students, and maybe a lot of us have, is that science comes from older, white, straight men. And that's just not the case. But we don't ever see STEM folks of color, people that look like us, if we're BIPOC folks, creating the things that are important and useful in this world. And then the core of critical social justice instruction is that rigorous, excellent, direct instruction. Yes, we're connecting with our students, but we're also raising the bar and giving them access to excellence, because that is a way to empower. And so we have opportunities for guided practice. We have opportunities for independent practice. We wrap things up. And the work of Matthew K is really seminal in this work that we have been doing. He wrote a beautiful book called Not Light But Fire. And he says, I can shift our schedule. Look at Rebecca for the props. Oh, no, she doesn't have it.
I know, I must.
I can shift our schedule so that I engage students as humans before I engage them as students. And we'll show you a little bit, another little nugget of his that we love, because it's so important to do. So going back to that 5 minutes of STEM folks of color, what can that look like? That can look like having a moment where you highlight and you name the thing. You say, not all mathematicians look like John Nash in this movie, right? If there's a whole movie made about a mathematician, it's usually going to be about a straight white guy. So why can't we highlight the work of Talithia Williams, who's a statistician and mathematician right here at Harvey Mudd, right? Who wrote this amazing book, Power in Numbers, The Rebel Women of Mathematics. Shirley Jackson, who's a physicist. Laura Gomez, who came to this country as an undocumented person with her family, and then caused a revolution in Google and Twitter, and now has her own company called Altipica that is changing the game, the game of artificial intelligence. And her whole company, the premise of it is using artificial intelligence to eliminate bias in hiring. Amazing work. Maria Mirzakhani, who was a brilliant, she passed away sadly of breast cancer, brilliant mathematician doing things that I can't even name in this moment around the concept of math. Artur Avila, who's the first Latino mathematician, Brazilian, to win the Fields Medal, which is like the equivalent of the Nobel Prize. We don't hear these stories. These stories raise all of us up, white folks included. White students need to hear. These are the movers and shakers along with white people. We all have skin in the game when we can see our folks doing the things. So here is another example that I want to share with you from my personal life. So this past summer, after George Floyd was murdered, Rebecca gifted my students this amazing book. It's called A Kid's Book About Racism by Jelani Memory. So that's the author holding the book there. So this book has no images, it just has words. So I use this really as the springboard. My husband and I are teachers, and so sometimes our kids could be like our little laboratory. So our little laboratory became the strategy that I used was one of the most elemental and simple strategies that we use in K-12, notice and wonder. So we picked up some magazines that I had lying around the house, and what do you notice and wonder? And right away, it became pretty evident. We noticed that we're seeing a lot of skinny white women. Great. Are you wondering where the folks in wheelchairs are? Women with hijabs, older people, people of color, people that look like dad, people that look like me, people that look like you. So it was super easy and accessible and appropriate. There were 5 and 6 last summer. And so we went into the book that just had these words. So Jelani Memory talks about the fact that his dad is Black, his mom is white. So we looked through magazines and found representative pictures, and that gave us an opportunity to talk about there's such a wealth and a range of what Black folks look like, right? And white folks too. So let's pick that up and work with it. We use the term multiracial in our house, but I introduced them to the term mixed that Jelani Memory uses as well. And those are pictures of them. Those are the kids, and they use their own pictures to illustrate that page. And as we did that work in really casually critical ways, like let's keep looking, oh, look, here's a trans person. Here's a person wearing a hijab. Here's Asian people. Do you know how hard it is to find pictures of Asian men in magazines? I discovered this through this process with my children of being casually critical. So we illustrated our book, and then our culminating project, I said, okay, what is the idea that your poster is going to have? We're just going to make a poster. You pick the images, you pick the idea. And this was the idea that they came away with. And so there are my kiddos last summer, and they were really proud of this work. And it was joyful, and it was accessible, and it was a way to help them affirm that when we put our little baby critical social justice glasses on, because this is work that can be done with the littles, right? As Rebecca is highlighting, you could do this in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. Now, when they look around, they're like little baby critical social justice scholars. So my son in particular, this has really resonated with him. He will call out like, oh, there's a Target commercial and there's a person with Down syndrome. There's a person with a hijab. It's really hard to see that. My daughter has pointed out often what resonates with her is that weddings don't have to be about a white man and a white woman, which is so many of the images that we see. Here we have a same-sex couple, and Target is celebrating their marriage. We have biracial families, we have multiracial families. So once you name the thing and you see the thing and you enable your students to put their lenses on, then they take it from there and they can run with it. And this ties just beautifully with the work of Shea Wesley Martin, who's another scholar whose work we want to amplify. And what they say is that I think the easiest way I found for teachers to take the first step to do this kind of work is to just look at who is included and then also left out of what you already have. There are little tweaks that you can make as a teacher, whether it is like an extra quick write or a do now, an extra credit activity, or just a video that you're showing that will make students, one, know that you're really there as an ally, but then two, also feel included and affirmed and celebrated in your classroom. We really want to just explode the concept of kids walking into classrooms and never seeing themselves, never seeing also other people that don't look like themselves other than white folks, right? So we have full classrooms of Latinx kids, maybe 100% of the kids are Latinx, but they never see a book about an Asian person or a Middle Eastern person or women with hijabs. Why? And who does that serve? What does that perpetuate? So let's start thinking about what that low-hanging fruit in your classroom looks like. So we're doing so well on time that we've got time to lean into this one. We want you to go back to your groups and think really concretely. What's an image, a book, an example, an anecdote that you can use as an entry point to be casually critical in your classroom or in your life? And
So
we consider this low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, so we'll give you about 1 minute to start brainstorming ideas, and then we'll send you into that group. There's also a section for this in your graphic organizer.
Just waiting an extra minute for everybody to come flying back in. Missing a few more. Okay. Sorry. Were you in the middle of something, Gabriel? See, Gabriel Chaparro is like, why? Why Zoom?
I'll survive.
Okay. Would you like to share the awesome thing that you were maybe about to share with us? Because this is our moment to, we'd love to hear from you and think, be able to kind of peek into your thinking.
No, I'm triggered now, so no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm kidding. I'm playing.
Okay.
We were talking about, well, I was just talking about how I used to be a science teacher, and before having any really good training, like the conversation started with, how do I branch away from my department, if you will, when they're stuck on teaching old dead white guy stuff, and I don't want to anymore. But when I take the time to do what I'm gonna do, when I go back to my department to, to share what I've been doing, everyone looks at me with the eye of judgment. And my answer was, that's when you flip them off. Because it's like at some point, and this is what I was getting at with my group before I got cut off, because I was talking about how I used to teach and what I used to do, which took a lot of time, is like you kind of take the stance. And if you get reprimanded, then maybe that's not where you should be working, because if you don't have the support, and if you're going to end up, not being able to make progress, and if you're not able to fight the system, but they're not giving you support to even like, well, you know what, that's a very interesting way of doing it. So let's set some funding aside, and I'll give you one prep so that you can develop a curriculum and then bring it back, and let's see how it goes. And I know that's a dream, because I've been there, right? I know it's a dream, and it's a good dream, right? But without people like rooting in and saying, this is what I'm going to do, even if it means that next year I have to find another position. Well, that's one, it's kind of out of your control, but two, it's like, you got to find a place that's going to be open to these things, because that's where your pedagogy is, and that's where your practice is, and that's what you're going to do, regardless if they like it or not. So they either want you or they don't.
Awesome. And whether they want you or not, you do the thing, right? Dr. Suafoa just called it out in the chat. You do the good, you get in good trouble. You do the necessary work to do what your kids, to do right by your kids, for sure.
Something that Gabriel just said that popped into my head, or having had that experience of being like fired from different places for trying to make that change. I think as a teacher, especially if you're going to engage in this kind of work, it's really important to recognize where you're doing that work and understand that the system of education that we have now is in no way, shape, or form broken. It is producing the results that it was meant to produce. So all this idea of our students being Black, brown, queer folks, anybody who doesn't fall within that like centerpiece is meant to be subtracted, invisibilized, and like kicked out of those places. This is what it was meant to do. So when we do this work, we're doing it we're working within a system that was not meant to do what we're asking it to do. And within that, it is important for us to be able to do what like Angela Davis calls like a radical reimagining of what things are supposed to be, and work not just to disrupt, but to dismantle those things that are creating these things, but at the same time, reimagine and build the things that are there. And part of that is really destroying the idea, and this is something we talked about in our groups, destroying the ideas of binaries, right? So when we look at education in our education system, it's very much a binary. It's white and non-white. And like it's really easy to define what white is not, and it's very difficult to define what white is, because it gives us so much ability to make folks the other, and challenging those binaries, whether it be race, gender, class, whatever, is super important, and what that work looks like within ourselves, right? Because I think the most important thing I found from here is looking at within and really doing this work within ourselves. Because if we just do it with a picture and are not doing these questions within ourselves, then our students are going to tell that that's fake, and they're going to run away from that and be soured on that work. It's work that we have to do, and it's part of that healing work to create those spaces for our kids to do that.
I love that. Thank you so much, Herman. I could just want to take everything you said and highlight it. You are the dismantlers and the disruptors in this room. You are the crazy ones. You're the ones that are bucking the system and finding ways to subvert the thing that it was designed to do. So I say yes to all of that.
And I'm going to pick up that thread that you just laid down, and of the binary, and the way that binaries can be so damaging and can erase so many parts of ourselves and also of our students. And one of the binaries that's really harmful within schools is that binary of time, that either we have time for content or we have time for meeting students where they are and developing a relationship with them. And another thing that we want to disrupt and sort of poke holes in and say this is not true is that we don't have that binary of time. But when we do a lot more time for a particular activity, that's what students will think we value most. And so by that reasonable metric, students generally understand our course content to be the most important subject in our classroom ecologies, in our room. So while students may believe that we mean them no active harm and that we would generally prefer that they were happy, their personal lives rarely feel like a priority. And this also comes from the work of Matthew Kay. And so one thing that I would ask is, do we have the time to allow our students to emerge from schooling 12 years and feel like they don't matter, and like other people's personal lives don't matter, and other people's personal experiences don't matter? Is that the outcome that we want from schools? And so I don't think that we have, I don't think we can afford not to spend time getting to know and meeting our students as people first, and giving them space within our container, within our classroom ecology, to be all of who they are. And so Matthew Kay says, he's not going to allot more time for discussing students' personal lives than content, because that would be irresponsible and disrespectful. But it's not a binary. We don't have to choose between them. We can choose both. We can be that warm demander. And so from here, I want to bring you back to the wolves. And I want to continue to point out, and I think Gabe and Herman, you both kind of transitioned us really well into this idea that the wolf was endangered. And that's not, that, you know, right? A species that's endangered, there aren't many of them. And they're being killed off. Just like so many of the critical social justice teachers that we're trying to support are burning out or being pushed out in different ways because the system was not built to support critical social justice. And so we do have to reimagine it. And I want you to continue to think about what do you have in common with wolves as we watch this video that makes me kind of cry every time. Some of you might have seen it. But as you're watching, imagine yourself as the wolf and see what does that mean and what are the possibilities within the ecosystem that you're operating within.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years. That the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds, of migratory birds, started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes, and as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed. More pools formed. More riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was less soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
And those are the wolves. And want you to imagine yourself as one of those wolves. Those wolves are small in number, but they were able to transform not just the ecosystem, but also the geography and the structures. And with the power and sort of harnessing the tools of critical social justice, we also have the opportunities to change not just our classroom ecologies, but also the systems within which they exist. And I'm accidentally playing the film again, so I'll stop that. But in the world that we're looking for and we're yearning for the kinds of classrooms and schools that folks don't need to recover from. We don't want ecosystems that need to be rebuilt. We want to create balanced, healthy, inclusive ecosystems that support everyone within them. And so we're really grateful to have you here to do that work with us. And so as we close out our session today, we wanted to just take a brief meta moment to peek behind the curtain and show you some of the strategies that we've used for addressing positionality and considering it within the context of our ecosystem as we're in community with you today. And so some of those key ways that we've aimed to do this and to model for you how it can be done both casually and deliberately is through deliberate disclosure and micro stories to connect, reveal, model, normalize, and problematize. We've also intentionally selected images of authors and scholars to emphasize and to show you that research and scholarship isn't neutral and it's not anonymous, as it's so often treated. We wanted to make sure to include images and ideas of diverse people and cultures to describe and refer to a world that includes all kinds of people. We were intentional about giving common definitions to cultivate rather than assume common understanding and communication. We also used a lot of visuals as metaphors, analogies, and ways of making content accessible, including juxtaposing images to make a point without needing to make it. And we did our best to scaffold access to these complex ideas using independent work and reflection and group processing. And hopefully, in all of those efforts and in the time that we were able to spend together, you do feel like we were able to accomplish some of the goals that we set out to accomplish, which are grappling with positionality and considering our place within our classroom ecology. And so if you're willing, we would love it if you would take a minute just to complete a really, really short, brief evaluation that just helps to inform the work we're doing and help us get better, because we also believe that as we know better, we do better. And so I've just added that in. You're welcome to complete it now, or you can complete it in the next few minutes. It's not going to disappear, but we would really, really appreciate it. And just to close out our time together, we are hoping that you can share with us something that you feel excited and empowered to try, either in your classroom or in your life, in your communities and in community with folks around you. So we're really grateful for you for showing up, for engaging with us. We don't make it easy to do this work, but hopefully we make it fun because we like it also. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you all.